a little Torah study for this week. We have the fascinating Torah portion of Shalach, which is the fascinating story of the spies, or the scouts, in Hebrew, the Meraglim, who were sent on a mission to scout out the land of Israel. The circumstances under which this took place was...
Are you recording?
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much. The circumstances under which this took place was in the midst of the Jews being in the desert, and they had just come out of Egypt, crossed the Red Sea, received the Torah, and had been in the desert for a short while, and now they knew that the next major step, which was really in many ways the purpose of it all, was to head to the promised land, the land of Israel. And at this point, there seems to be a little bit of hesitation among the Jewish people, who responded to Moshe's idea of heading straight to the promised land. They said, well, maybe we should send some representatives. Maybe we should plan this a little bit better. Maybe we should strategically think this through and make sure that this is truly a wise and good idea. And basically, they came up with a suggestion that they should send representatives from each of the 12 tribes, 12 individuals, 12 leaders, who would go on behalf of their constituents and scout out the land and see what the situation over there is. And when Moses consults with God about the idea, God says, if this is what you want to do, then do it. And God agrees to the plan that Moses had received, or the suggestion that Moses had received from the Jewish people. Now, what happens in the story, we know. The spies go and they spend approximately 40 days scouting out the land and come back with huge, humongous fruits, overgrown fruits, and bring it back to the Jewish people in the desert and say, just as the fruits are strange in size and scope, so too the land and the people that live there. And they basically used that example as a signal to the Jewish people that we're never going to be able to conquer this land, we're never going to be able to inhabit this land. Bad idea. There was 2 individuals, as we know, Yehoshua and Caleb, 2 out of the 12, who came back with a positive report and said, if this is what is meant to be, if this is what God has in store for us, then certainly this is something that we are able to accomplish. Now, the question on this story is a very simple one, which is, we know that the 12 individuals that were chosen were all prominent individuals, strong leaders, spiritually connected, people that were really very much a part of the Jewish people's direction and inspiration up until this point. They weren't just random people, they weren't just politicians who had been elected or managed to get themselves elected. They were genuinely God-fearing, holy people. And the question begs to be asked, how would such individuals have such a change of heart? They knew, and they had been told from the time when they were in Egypt, that was the legend from the times of Abraham. Your children, your grandchildren, your descendants will inherit the land of Israel. And here it was about to happen. They were just, not too long ago, left Egypt. They had received the Torah, gotten the Torah at Mount Sinai. They were ready. A 500-year promise was about to be fulfilled. And here these leaders have a change of heart. So on one hand, obviously their change of heart was not justified, and there was corrections made. On the other hand, the question is, how did they miss the cue, and how did they make such an error in the first place? So there's many different explanations, and one of the favorite ones that I've come across is a beautiful insight into the experience that they were enjoying in the desert versus what they would be facing if they went into the land of Israel. And if we go into it specifically, we see something very interesting. When they were in the land when they were in the desert, we know that the manna was falling from heaven. They didn't have to worry about their grocery shopping. They didn't have to worry about inflation, about the cost of goods. Everything was delivered to their doorstep. It was like Instacart. It was like 21st century without inflation. It was the best combination you could think of. The manna tasted like whatever they wanted it to, except for there was a few exceptions. But it was delivered to their front door, and life was good. In addition to that, we know that there was water, fresh spring water, that they had access to during their entire journey in the desert. This was actually known as the Well of Miriam, the sister of Moshe, the sister of Moses, who, in her merit, there was always water available to the Jewish people. So plenty to drink. True, wasn't alcohol. They couldn't say l'chaim. But water and manna tasting like whatever they wanted, was a pretty good deal. In addition to that, we're told that their clothes miraculously grew with them and did not need too much laundering and too much attention. The clothes were also provided for and didn't need too much of their effort to maintain. So practically speaking, it was an opportunity for a very blissful and even spiritual existence, where all their material needs were provided for, and they didn't have to worry about anything material, and they could spend all of their effort, all of their time, all of their brain space to think about more important things, to think about meaning, purpose, the study of Torah, connection to God, and more lofty spiritual ideals. If they would go into the land of Israel, however, that would all change in a very dramatic way. Because in the land of Israel, we know there are many mitzvot, many responsibilities to do with cultivating the land, and mitzvot that really tie the person down to chores that engage the person into material and physical responsibilities. And this, they thought, would be a distraction from their spiritual pursuit, from their ultimate goal of having a godly connection devoid of any physical distraction. So in their minds, entering the land of Israel was actually going to set them back from their spiritual goals and pursuit of spiritual connection. However, as we read in the Torah portion, they made a grave error. And when I say a grave error, there's a double meaning in that, because they were told that they would all die out in the desert over the next 40 years and not merit to go into the land of Israel, besides for a few exceptions, Yehoshua and Caleb, who we mentioned earlier. But in addition to that, their error was that they completely misunderstood and misinterpreted the whole experience of Sinai and what it means to receive the Torah and commit to mitzvot in this world. They thought that the whole idea of Torah was to be more spiritual. While that is not entirely wrong, it's more than just being spiritual. It's bringing spirituality into the physical. It's elevating the physical world with spiritual sense of purpose and direction that really is what the purpose is all about. And it's specifically when you go out into the field and you plant and you cultivate the land and you go through all the processes of plowing and seeding and everything that the cultivation of the land requires, and you see your own efforts being fruitful with the blessing of divine intervention that makes all of these processes successful, it's through that merging and marrying of heaven and earth, of the spiritual and the physical, that we truly transform the physical world in which we live. And their mistake was they thought that spirituality divorced of physical engagement is the most lofty level, when the truth is the exact opposite is true in Judaism. It's the spiritual that is anchored in the physical. It's the physical engagement that opens up our eyes and our mind to appreciate the spiritual nature of existence, the miraculous nature of the world that God created. That is where it is at. That is where the Jewish connection is found. That is where the spiritual connection is most meaningful. So they were mistaken and corrected. And that is a lesson that remains relevant for each and every one of us as well, where we are reminded through the narrative, through the story of this week's Torah portion, that it is the physical engagement, it is the mitzvot that we do in the day-to-day chores, the day-to-day rhythms of material existence that are infused with a sense of spiritual meaning and purpose and direction that really create that beautiful relationship and that meaningful existence right here on the physical plane. So this is why the story of the spies is such a powerful one and such a relevant one, because in a way we are all those spies that are scouting out the physical world. And instead of being intimidated by it and scared off by it, we have to realize that the message of spiritual existence that we all represent is stronger than the resistance of the material distraction that the world sometimes seems to offer. And when we are certain about our spiritual purpose, we can transform the physical resistance into being elevated to that spiritual purpose as well. And this actually connects to another detail within the story, where we find that when the spies came back, they reported that they saw giants in the land of Israel, and that the giants considered them to be like little grasshoppers. And they concluded that thought by saying, and we too felt like grasshoppers in their eyes. Now, this is an interesting detail because it's very telling on a psychological level about their downfall and how they can make such a mistake. And that is because it's one thing for them to truthfully report that the giants that were there considered these spies that were scouting out the land as grasshoppers. But it's a different statement, completely different perception to say we felt like grasshoppers in their eyes. That means you're allowing other people's projections of what you are and who you are to define who you think you can be. And that is a grave mistake. That is a powerful idea that we can all apply in everyday life as well, especially in the age of social media, in the age of naming and shaming and calling people this and calling people that, where the world on so many levels has gotten so debased from their inherent godly value, which is priceless and precious, that every single human being fits into that category of a priceless, precious creation of God. And instead, there is this unfortunate reality where people take their sense of self-worth from what other people say and how many likes they got and how many likes they didn't get, and so on and so forth. So here we find in biblical proportions and in biblical story how the spies made in some ways that very same error that we are fighting against internally ourselves today as well. It's one thing for somebody to have an opinion about you. It's another thing for you to believe that that opinion is correct. We have to know that our self-worth and our existence and identity is a God-given gift. It's a God-given right. It's a God-given existence. And that is who we are. That is what we represent. That is the priceless value of each and every one of us and each and every human being. So this is on a deeper, more psychological level. What led to their mistake was they thought that the way others underestimated them was truly an assessment of who they were. If they realized how much they had been endowed and deputized to conquer the world with goodness, with kindness, with Torah, with spirituality, with meaning and purpose, then they would have never made that mistake of thinking that they cannot face the material realities of the land of Israel and have to hide in a nomadic existence in the desert to protect themselves from the material physical world. Torah empowers us. Torah reminds us that we are capable, we are able to speak truth to power, speak Torah to the material world and show the material world how it can be elevated and transformed into an agent of goodness and kindness through the direction and meaning that we bring to it. So this is the message of the Torah portion today, and a reminder of our role in being the messengers that are scouting out the land, scouting out the world, scouting out the physical existence of the 21st century, and bringing a message of meaning and purpose and elevating everything around us. Amen.